This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Hi, Govindh here. Before we dive in, I want to let you know that you're listening to a special edition of Paper Napkin Wisdom, the Freedom Framework series built around a new book by Michael Walsh. In this series, Michael and I explore what it really takes to build a business that works for you, not the other way around. We're talking about freedom in your business, freedom from your business, and freedom because of your business. We'll talk about what each of those things mean. Each episode brings you tools, insights, and in-depth conversation between Michael and I about how to bring this kind of freedom into your life. If you're ready to design a business that you don't need to escape from, you're in the right place. Listen in.
Welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom, where we share pearls of wisdom shared by some of the world's top entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers. Here's your host, Govindh Jayaraman.
Hi, I'm Govindh Jayaraman, and this is Paper Napkin Wisdom, episode 271. If you're new to this show, think of this space as your favorite coffee shop table where big ideas start small, scribbled on a simple napkin, and then grow into game-changing breakthroughs for entrepreneurs, leaders, and difference makers just like you. Today, we continue our Freedom by Design series with part 11, featuring Michael Walsh, founder of Walsh Business Growth and a strategist who's helped hundreds of business owners escape the growth trap without losing what matters most. Michael's work sits at the intersection of profit, purpose, and people because his rowing coach past means that he knows a thing or two about turning individual effort into unstoppable team power. As you lean in, you might begin to wonder how a single shift in perspective could transform the way your teams operate, perhaps even freeing you to focus on vision instead of firefighting. Michael drops a piece of napkin wisdom that quietly rewires the way we think about people problems. So, allow yourself to get curious. What would become possible if your teams and company ran like an intelligent ecosystem? Listen closely. Jot down the sparks that land for you, and when something hits home, share it with the community using the hashtag #PaperNapkinWisdom. Who knows? Your next breakthrough might start with a doodle on the corner of a coffee shop napkin. Let's dive in. Michael Walsh, welcome back. We have been talking about your freedom framework, and this is so powerful. I think that what we're doing is we first started talking about some of the challenges as organizations grow through the danger zones from $1 million and $20 million and beyond, and they navigate the 4 danger zones. And what's underneath the surface of those danger zones is people. And as we've explored that, with the goal of achieving freedom in the business to do the things we want to do, freedom from the business so we can go away and, have a vacation, and freedom because of the business. So that the life that we might want to have because of the success that we hopefully are growing within the organization. We've just been talking at length, at detail, at important detail about training and growing your people and how important it is to do this and how important it is to develop a career development growth plan that is integrated with the rate of role of the individual over time. Now, where we left off at the end of that was 10 great questions. Something we didn't say that I think is really relevant, though, is, it takes time to do this. Not a lot of time, not nearly as much time as people think, but it takes time to do this. But the suggestion is that it takes about 2 hours or so to do this, sometimes longer, depending upon the person, but let's say 2 hours to do this. And if we're paying somebody, let's keep the number simple, $50,000. And if we're paying them $50,000 a year, and they're with us for a year or 2 years, and they're the wrong person, that's costing us just in salary, $50,000 to $100,000.
Right.
plus payroll tax, plus benefits, plus maybe all the stuff they don't care about that they don't do that well, and its effect or impact on the organization and financially or otherwise. On the other hand, 2 hours, what's it worth? Is it worth $100,000? It probably is. 2 hours of your time is probably worth $100,000. And that's the bottom line. That's why it's important to get this stuff right, because it doesn't take that much time relative to the overall benefit that we get, correct?
Right.
Then the next step on this is to focus on teams. And look, here's why. We've talked about, and go back and listen to it if you didn't listen to it, about developing a career development growth plan where we understand the superpowers and kryptonites of individual team members. Now we're putting those employees together into teams. What do we need to do? Well, you've talked about problems and solutions, and you've got numbers of points under each one. Let's dive in.
Okay.
Where should we go first? Rather than me tell you and then you correct me, why don't you tell me where we go first, Michael?
Well, I don't know. What do you think, Govindh? I'll tell you what. Here's the thing. If your people are key for you to gain freedom, then teams done well can multiply that power. Okay, people working together in teams, they drive everything that's good in the company. However, without them, life actually gets a lot harder. So I look at, when we talk about the career growth plan, the career development growth plan, it's all about the individual. Except we said that there was two different elements, in terms of what we were hoping to get. We want them to be able to generate a result individually for the benefit, of the client, as far as that's concerned, usually. But we also want them to be able to work with each other to generate results that are larger than any single individual could generate. And that's where teams come in. In fact, quite often, it's a natural place to go as far as that's concerned. And it's interesting because if your company grows beyond that first danger zone, when you're approaching a couple million in revenue, chances are good that people are pretty good at working with each other to get a result. So they've already got some sort of semblance of teamwork as far as that's concerned. You put them in situations where they could do the job and they learn how to work with each other a little bit, and so you figure, well, that's not a big deal. That's what we're used to doing. Except as you grow further, then what happens is that you get more teams. And again, the individual teams of knowledge workers are where you actually generate the results. So as you get more teams, the wheels start to get a little wobbly as far as that's concerned, because how do I design these things? Because they just haven't been designed, as well as we think. And cracks actually do start to show up.
Yeah. And you know what, the things that I think is really interesting is most of your napkins where you've got this line in between have great symmetry between each side. Mm-hmm. But in this case, the problems are the wrong people and people not getting along. And the solutions are, adjacent to that, but not direct, they're not direct things. And follow my train of thought. Train people for teamwork. Well, I think what you're suggesting is that most people just don't understand how to work together, as opposed to them not necessarily being the wrong people.
Right. So rather than actually saying I've got the wrong people on my team, or they just can't get along with each other, and maybe we need an outward bound experience or something so they bond in or something. I mean, that's what a lot of people do. But
this is what people put in pizza carts and stuff like that. This is just ridiculous. They just haven't trained people to work together.
Correct. And so they really revolve around this either competence or it's a relationship issue. And sometimes it's just that they don't know how to work together because they just sort of have to figure it out. I mean, but here's the thing. We haven't been trained for teamwork. Okay.
But wait a minute, Michael, we do group work at, if people went to college or university, they've done group work there. People played on athletic teams. Sure, they've done teamwork, right?
Percentage of people play on athletic teams.
Imagine you're a business owner relying on a dozen different software programs, each one disconnected, more expensive, and more complicated than the last. It can be incredibly stressful, right? Now, picture Odoo. Odoo brings all the tools your business needs into one simple platform. CRM, accounting, inventory, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and more. All seamlessly connected. Everything works together, giving you the peace of mind that your business is running smoothly from every angle. Odoo's open source applications are user-friendly and designed to scale with your business, saving you time and money. Say goodbye to juggling multiple platforms and hello to efficient, integrated management. Stop wasting resources on complicated systems and make the switch to Odoo today. Visit odoo.com, ODOO.com, and discover how Odoo can simplify and streamline your business operations. Odoo, modern management made simple.
What percentage of people play on the winning athletic teams? Because there's a lot of people and a lot of personalities on athletic teams. And I got to tell you, you've got some people that hog the ball, and other people that actually sit there and let those people hog the ball, But even in school, if you look in school, everybody's been told, work hard, okay? Make sure you finish what you start, okay? Do your own work. And whatever you do, don't cheat. Now, what does that mean? Okay, cheating is relying on somebody else to do the parts that are hard for you. But weren't we raised that way?
Yeah.
Okay, but so building a team is actually a design issue. And really what you want to do is you want somebody else to do the parts that are hard for you, and you want to do the parts that are hard for them. I mean, it's called complementary strengths. But we've been trained in the opposite. Everybody has to be this thing called a rugged individualist, And I think Dan Sullivan came up with that term. And it's fascinating to see it. It's like everybody figures they have to have all the skills on their own because that's what we're trained. If you're looking on somebody else's paper, you're cheating. Okay. And or if, we've all been on these group projects where one or two people do 90% of the work because they're kind of control freaks. They want it to go a certain way, and the other people sit back and let them. Okay. I mean, have you ever had a group that's 5 people where everybody, has done incredible work? I bet you have more than 2 or 3, out of an entire career of going to school for however many years that was, including college and university and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we're actually just not trained for teams as far as that side is concerned. So you say, well, there's athletic teams, but how many people were on athletic teams versus individual teams?
So the other part, I love that you said this, not just teams, athletic teams, but winning athletic teams that they understood that different people have different roles, and we have to work together regardless of our roles and talent and skill levels. We still have to work together. And it's in appreciating those roles and leveraging them that we actually find success, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so there's a number of factors, okay, that are at play in team development as far as that's concerned. And one of the most basic in any expertise-driven field is getting clear on what you want to achieve. In other words, setting better goals. What I find is what you measure, you actually have access to adjust along the way. If you don't measure it, you don't adjust it because you're not even aware that that was an issue at all. We'll say, well, we got the wrong people on the team, as opposed to our team's not working very well because we don't know how to do handoffs. I mean, if you take a look at let's take a 4x100 track meet, a relay race. You have 4 individuals, and what they find is that what they'll do is they'll put the strongest person on the last leg. They put the second strongest person on the first leg. They put the third strongest person on the third leg and the weakest person on the second leg. Okay. Just because I want to start strong, I need to finish strongest. And the second leg is, if anything happens, then I can make it up in the third leg and the fourth leg as I go. But on the shoulders of my second strongest person on the whole team starting the race, I'm in a situation that if there's somebody that sort of loses any ground, I can make it up most easily from the second position. If I lose too much ground in the first position, I might have lost the race already before I even get to the second one. Now, here's a question that I have for you. There's going to be 2 questions. Where do you think the most power exists in a 4x100 relay race?
In the handoff.
That's not the most power at all.
But that's where the win is.
I'd say that the 2 places I look at for power, not that I'd ever disagree with you, sir, But the two places I look at is the start. If I can get a really strong start, there's power coming out of the blocks. There's power right after the handoff for each position. And then there's what's called the run for the roses, the last 50 yards, where the person, just adrenaline takes over, and because they're at the end of it. That's why if I've got the strongest person there, I'll probably get the best last dash. So that's what I would allege is the power. Now I'm going to ask a different question, and now you may see where I'm headed here. Where's the riskiest part?
Handoff.
There you go. See, that's not the most powerful. That's the riskiest. Guess where?
Yeah, but I guess what I looked at is the most powerful opportunity, not the most power. And I was looking at it as
power.
When you reframed it as physical power, I understood what you said. But the most powerful opportunity to me is the handoff.
Yeah, well,
because that's the greatest delta. That's where the greatest delta exists.
Because that's where the biggest risk is.
Exactly.
And so what happens is if I'm a little outside the line, or you're a little outside the line, or if I hand it off too early, or if we go too late, disqualifications all occur. 90% of disqualifications happen at the handoff. The other 10% is at the start line.
Correct.
Doesn't happen that often because you can call one false start and then they behave and go on. But I got to tell you that the handoff is where disqualifications occur. So that's where people will lose it as opposed to where people can gain it. And if you don't practice the handoff, it doesn't work. Now, in a 4x100 relay, they know this. So guess what they spend a lot of time doing?
Well, some nations do.
The ones that win do. They practice that handoff, and
but there's a great story, right, in the last Olympics, where the country with the greatest sprinters, the United States, didn't place because the plucky country without the greatest sprinters practiced their handoffs, really works at teamwork, and won.
And that
Canada
goes to your point.
Right.
Yeah, well, that goes to your point of where the biggest, most powerful opportunity is. I can see what you're saying when you talk about the most powerful opportunity, because it's like you practice the high risk place, and you can take out that risk or mitigate that risk or minimize that risk. All of a sudden, everything else, it changes the whole thing.
Or you take what everybody else deems as a weakness into your strength.
Well, yeah. Well, let's put it this way: if everybody struggles with that piece, if I learn how to master it, then all of a sudden I take that off the mat, and all the rest of it, that'll make up for a little bit of difference in terms of speed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating to see how that part goes. So the first job, and again, a team that would actually do that has expanded their goal set. They're not just about getting the last end result or getting the best times for each person. They're actually about different parts of it. So how do I relate that to goals with regards to teams, which is exactly where I'm diverting this back to myself. There's 4 different sets of goals that you want to look at, okay? When you're dealing, for example, with project-based work, okay? Obviously, the first one is the achievement of client deliverables, okay? And that one we're pretty good at, okay? The second one, I don't know that you'll be surprised. I don't think you'll be surprised at this one. Is the second one is, what are the individual learning goals or growth goals for each team member? In other words, in light of what we talked about last time with our career development growth plan, I want to use every part of the job in support of people's growth. Well, projects are no different. So I need to have goals around what is it each person going to learn on this project? And I don't care whether it's a 2-week project or a 6-month project or a 2-year project. What are the different things that somebody has an opportunity to learn from individually? Okay. The third one is, what are the team goals? So how do the people want to work with each other to generate the best possible results? So I talk about, and we talk through different people's respective superpowers, okay? How they'd like to contribute to accelerate the team. How do I strengthen, things and create stronger results overall? And for the project, for each person, and for the team as a whole, okay? And then the fourth one would be company-focused results. So what are the company's goals from the project? So there's obviously going to be goals for gross profit achieved. I mean, everybody includes the financial goal, but there's a lot more. So some of the goals could be the growth and reputation, in a project type or in an industry, increased internal capabilities collectively. Okay, using the project to help streamline an internal process, or it could be some other potential goal that moves the company forward. So I'm looking at more than just the achieving the client deliverable. I'm looking at that as one, but individual learning, team goals, and then company focused goals as well, as far as that side is concerned. Now, the one thing I will say, there's a gentleman who's actually done a masterful job at actually speaking about all this stuff. And let me just look at, I've got his information here. I referenced him in the book. Okay, so I don't have it in this particular edition, but I will get, I believe the gentleman's name is Mark Samuel, and he wrote a book called Reimagine Teams. And so he goes into a lot more detail about how to break down goals, and as far as that's concerned, and what aspects of team goals to look at. And the guy's really done great work on it. And it's definitely a worthy read as far as that's concerned. So I believe it's Mark Samuel.
It is Mark Samuel.
Yeah, and Reimagine Teams it's a great book. And again, there's a lot of things that talk about teams, but he looks at different dimensions of how to design them from a design perspective to get that. So when you're taking a look at the types of goals, when I say goals for the team, he puts that thing on steroids.
Yeah, and I think one of the phrases that he uses is traditional team building doesn't work and hasn't for decades, if ever. So
right.
I think that's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
And the last point that you have here is building in mentoring support for each team member.
Yes. Well, because here's the thing about this is that, here's the risk that people make, or here's the difficulty that they run into when they're doing this. As a company grows, it gets more squirrely, because you got so many different people, and what happens is that it's really hard to measure results. When I'm small, I can measure results because I can see the results of the team. And if I've only got one or two teams, they're not going to go that far, and I can see what each person's contribution to the team effort and to the client result is. So I can actually measure performance and things like that using that model. When I break into a larger number of teams and people are sort of, forming and breaking up and then reforming, with each new project, it's really hard to actually go there. And so what I end up doing is going to competency models. And what a competency model is it's a model where you actually measure somebody's attributes and against what you expect them to have at a certain level of development. So just using engineering for an example, when somebody's learning how to become a P-Eng, a professional engineer, they one of the things I saw was it had 7 different levels. And in each of these different levels, there's a bunch of different competencies there. Well, some of it is problem solving, some of it is conflict resolution, some of it is their interaction with others, their communication skills, and all that stuff. And it's across a broad spectrum, but there's a different level of growth needed for each different level of engineering. Like, if I get to an E2 versus an E3 versus an E4, well, the problem is that if you and I are both engineers, that means we both have to have the same level of skills in the same areas to the same degrees to be at the same level. Except you may be strong at one thing and I may be strong at something different. And unless we're both strong at these things, we're not going to get the same pay. So what happens is they've gone away from a results model just because it's too complex to track, and they go to this competency model. And frankly, what happens is they start to actually have us be interchangeable. Okay, the minute you start to have conformity, you start to lose the uniqueness of each person, and you actually harm the team. And so, and if we're completely interchangeable, you've literally lost that X factor of the human element within a project, where you're really not tapping the magic that each person has to bring as far as that's concerned. We know that teams generate results if they're done well. And teams of complementary strengths generate those. So if I can keep a team model, even as I grow, and I found ways to actually support the measurement and support of people in their learning. I mean, we've got the individual project plans, the individual career development plans. People will actually plan their projects. But if I can dovetail their work on a team with that actual growth plan, I'm in a situation where maybe I can keep teamwork that I know has worked at lower levels, I can keep that as a stable part as I grow. And so the way to do that, what I found is that, we've got two structural supports that are there, and there's actually lots of them, but I've identified two that I talk about in the book. And that's one is project teams based on what I call a homeroom model. Okay, so when I was in high school, at least a year or two ago, yeah, whatever.
Just a couple years ago.
It was at least. So when I was in high school, you know what? I had a bunch of different classes. So I had a schedule that had me at 8 different classes through a thing, through the course of a day. And I've seen other schools where they'd have them in more intense blocks and they might only have 4. But the bottom line is they're switching between different classes and you'd each follow your own schedule as far as that's concerned. But we're always checking in at a homeroom. And the homeroom wasn't any one of the classes. It was just a place where they take attendance and they do announcements and they, there's a number of things they do in a homeroom environment. If there's any special things they have to hand out or any special messages they deal with, they deal them in the homeroom. So if I've got a homeroom plus a project team, my homeroom leader could actually watch my growth while I go back and forth between different projects. And the homeroom leader, if you want to call it, or the equivalent of my homeroom teacher, could actually follow my development. So that's one model we've actually used quite successfully with people, is use this project team plus homeroom model, okay, to actually support them. The other one is to actually have a mentoring program that's not based in homerooms, but where people are actually assigned a mentor. And the mentors actually, one of the things about a mentor is they can't be your direct boss, or they cannot be your boss's boss. In other words, they've got to be somebody that's not directly tied to your ability to perform on your projects. So then they can truly be a mentor. They can really be support to you, not just trying to drive you to get a better result. And so we've actually set up that model as well. And so what happens is somebody gets a different perspective from somebody who's working either in a different part of the company or a different team. But, quite often they're obviously more established and they've got more experience, the mentors, than the mentees do. So they're there to grow the people. And then they either use outside mentors, or they might have a senior partner who actually supports some of the more senior mentors as far as that's concerned. So either a project-based plus homeroom setup, or a mentoring system that's not necessarily based in a homeroom, but that's independently devised. We've actually used both of those quite successfully, and those are only two. I mean, there's a number of other ways that people can do it. I mean, there's things called matrix management, and there's a bunch of other tools that people use for how do I actually allow teams to continue to be present and generate results, and still get the information, but also still find ways to support the individuals, even though they're changing between and among different teams.
Okay, so with all of that in mind,
Yes,
why do we need to focus on teams?
because teams actually are what allow you to generate collective results that are larger than any single individual can have. And frankly, the lion's share of your major results are going to come through teams. And if you do teams well, everything else goes really smoothly. And if I can keep it to teams, rather than going to some sort of a competency matrix actually quite often goes to bureaucratic systems, and I start to lose the uniqueness of each person. If I can continue to tap the uniqueness of each person, my cost effectiveness is way, way stronger. It's easier to give people bigger raises. It's easier to actually have people supported in their growth. That's another version of really integrating the various aspects of what can happen, because I'm tapping the power of something that I'm already good at a smaller size.
And we don't really know how to work in a team. And this is something that people need to understand. Like, we need to learn how to work as a team. We need to teach each other how to work as a team. We need to practice how we work as a team, because those things are not part of what we learn.
And one of the things about that, actually just mentioning it, we say we don't have time to practice. You know who practices?
Who?
One of two things. Actually, I'll say one of three things. One, when it's life and death. Fire departments practice constantly. Okay. Military, they practice constantly. The Navy SEALs practice constantly. Different people practice constantly where there's life and death involved. Police forces, they quite often they've got setups where they practice the things, certainly for SWAT teams and things like that. Now you can say, well, we're constantly at work. We don't have time to stop and like a fire department, they're waiting between fires. Okay. The second place you see it is in sports teams, because how they work with each other has a huge impact on whether this goes well or not. And the more money on the line, the more they practice as teams. And the winning teams, actually, you can tell who actually practices as a team or who's a series of individuals. Okay. And the third place is where it may not be life and death, but the stakes are really high depending on how well this goes. And the thing I'm thinking of is orchestras, and I'm thinking of ballet, where you've got multiple players in a ballet. And I'm also thinking of plays. When people put on a play, it's what's the cadence of how people work together? So again, lots of practice as far as that's concerned. But the truth is, we're not going 24/7. At least we don't need to be. And if we actually debrief and we see how we did, there's many ways to practice. So if we can actually integrate that into how we did, like who does, it's interesting because in Canada, we quite often talk about a debrief. In the UK, they talk about a wash-up. A wash-up is the British version of a debrief of what we call, and in the US, they talk about a post-mortem. So it's interesting. The language is different, but it's the same thing. It's taking a look and seeing what can we learn from what we just did? And then how do we want to do it this time? And so if I combine it with both the individual goals and also the goals for how the team works together, how do I do those handoffs? How do I look? Where are the tough spots? How do we talk about problems in a team? And this is where Samuel goes right into those kinds of things. The guy does a phenomenal job. My job wasn't to replicate what he's doing. It's more just to acknowledge that there's lots here and there's way too much to ignore. So
that's the point I wanted to get to, that there's way too much to ignore around focusing on teams. And this is something that needs to be done. And again, if you do it and integrate it into what you're doing, it doesn't take much time and it has high value.
And high freedom as well, because if your teams are clicking, you have a life back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Michael, thank you for unpacking how designing our teams rather than simply managing them sets us free as leaders. Your analogies and real-world examples showed that collaboration is not chemistry, it's craft. And we're grateful for the clarity you brought to the people side of growth. Key takeaways. Design the system first. Talent thrives inside smart structure. Train teamwork intentionally, just like any other critical skill. Stretch goals in 4 layers: client, individual, team, and company. Mentorship isn't overhead, it's a culture multiplier. Celebrate assists, not just points, to reinforce collective wins. So, time to take action. Subscribe and review. If today's conversation sparked new thinking, hit that follow button and leave a quick review so more leaders can find these ideas. Share the episode and forward the link to someone whose team is stuck in people problems. You might be handing them the blueprint they've been missing. Grab your nearest napkin and answer this question: where does my team drop the ball because the design is missing, not the talent? Write the first shift you'll make and share it, post it with a photo and the hashtag #PaperNapkinWisdom. Let's fill the feed with bite-sized blueprints for better teamwork. Remember, big results start with small scribbles, especially when those scribbles reimagine how people work together. Keep turning intention into action, and I'll see you in the next episode. Make it a great day.